My fellow Australians, a few moments ago I telephoned Mr Kevin Rudd and I congratulated him and the Australian Labor Party on a very emphatic victory. Now, this is a great democracy and I want to wish Mr Rudd well. He assumes the mantle of the 26th Prime Minister of Australia. And I want to say there is no prouder job in the world that anybody can occupy than being the Prime Minister of this country.
It seems to me that Howard always had a kind of a love affair with Australia and Australian people in much the same way Bob Hawke did. But I'm not really sure that Kevin or Malcolm like Australian people much at all. And I just wonder whether either of them ever had a convincing passion to make life better for Australians, to make this country better. I mean, you know, that's what we used to talk about at The Australian all the time. You know, it's there on the front page on day one, what the paper's mission statement is. You know, it's a bigger, better, stronger Australia. But what was their mission? It was maybe a bigger, better, stronger Malcolm and bigger, better, stronger Kevin.
How would you describe the personality or character trait that they shared in that regard?
Egotism, strong sense of self-worth, great intellects, able to work through a lot of complex information and process it, and certainly missing perhaps was a consciousness that you can't do this alone in a parliamentary democracy.
It's been a long road from country Queensland to the capital. He's only the third Labor Prime Minister to defeat a coalition government since World War II.
The Kevin 07 election, ending 11 years of John Howard's government. But we now know it was also the end of stability. Since Rudd's election victory, not a single Prime Minister has lasted from one election to even contest the next. The two most mercurial figures across this tumultuous period have been Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull. Tell us how these blokes managed to get involved in party politics and ascend to the leadership.
Well, Kevin Rudd was an incredible networker. I've never known and never will know someone who had such a propensity for self-advancement. If anyone had a couple of votes in the caucus, or a newspaper editor or a journalist had a couple of favourable square inches to put in a newspaper, Rudd would be all over them like a rash. On the phone, buttering them up, bullcrap language, telling them what they wanted to hear. This guy was 24/7 self-promotion.
In another of his long economic essays, Australians can expect financial pain.
Hang on, mate. I gave you a fair go, you give me a fair go, then you can have a chop. You tell us about what you will now do from this point on. We're all ears, mate.
I'm happy to respond.
What new will you do?
Oh, jeez.
And he wasn't alone. Both he and Malcolm Turnbull ruled the airwaves.
How do we get the trust? How do you get the trust of the public?
Tell the truth and get on with the job.
Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull are both great networkers. They know everybody. They've made it their business to know everybody. But do they have many close friends?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've been a long-term friend of Kevin's brother Greg, who I think is a good knockabout sort of Labor staffer and quite experienced in dealing with politicians, state and federal. And I think at a State of Origin match, when Kevin was first Prime Minister, after Kevin was cheered by the crowd at Lang Park, Greg turned around to Kevin and said, just remember one thing, this is as good as it's ever going to get. It's only going to go downhill from here. And I thought that was actually very good advice, you know, because, you know, politics is about a long process of failure, really, isn't it? You know, for everyone, no matter how good they are.
The reason they rose so quickly is because people did see them as very smart. People saw their intellect, and they saw their ability to actually lead the country and their potential.
They were messiah figures.
They were. They were both the saviours for their party. they were both seen to be saviours for their party at difficult times. You've got to remember, John Howard was an incredibly popular Prime Minister, and Rudd defeated him, which in a sense was a significant achievement in itself to defeat John Howard. And I mean, and the story about Turnbull's obvious, but they were very gifted and seen as messiahs for their party. And in a sense, that's why they resented one another. You know, one was saying, well, you're in my road, you're in my job. Get out of my job, get out of my way.
Less than 12 months after Kevin Rudd became Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull had knifed Brendan Nelson and was opposition leader. It was soon on for young and old.
Talk it up as much as you like. He has lied to this House.
Stand up. Be man enough to apologise and resign.
The louder they scream, the more desperate we see them to be.
This is a most serious matter which goes to the integrity of the man who purports to be the alternative Prime Minister of Australia. Both Rudd and Turnbull have been hypercritical of each other publicly and privately. They've attacked each other. There was enormous animosity. Do you think that might have been fuelled a little bit by recognising their similarities?
Yeah, I do, Chris. I think when Malcolm Turnbull was in opposition and Rudd was handling big issues like the GFC, Turnbull didn't think Rudd was up to it. And I think constantly saw that time through the prism of what he would have done and how effective he would have been. And I think when Turnbull was there and Rudd was not, I think Rudd looked at Turnbull, particularly on issues of environment, as him exploiting the missed opportunities that Rudd had and not taken advantage of.
He wants to be the blameless one. He wants to have no blame, no responsibility.
The Liberal Party is not about fact, it is about the politics of fear.
The Prime Minister wants a leave pass for economic laziness.
He has chosen a course of action which shows an absolute want of courage.
Truth is that every step you've taken, you too, every step you've taken has made things worse.
Both of them would have just sent us a contest. You know, I'm the best. No, I'm the best. No, I'm the best. And so it's who destroys each other first. You've got to learn in life to let go. Now, I try to let go because if you have hatreds, dislike, anger inside you, it becomes like a tumour almost.
Mr. Abbott,
so I do let go.
Bears any
so
public
do Malcolm
life.
and Kevin.
He held
and
true to
people
them
of that,
as an
ilk. Let go, whether they be in business or politics. No, they don't, and it's just not in their DNA to let go.
At one point, he was the most popular Labor leader ever, according to the polls.
Malcolm Bligh Turnbull, a name that seemed destined to rule.
They were very presidential. I mean, I think back to the Hawke Keating days. I mean, they were powerful figures, but they also took their party with them. And in a sense, it was more a collegiate team. If you think of Malcolm's government, it's Malcolm. If you think of Kevin's government, it was Kevin. So that presidential style wasn't really how the Westminster system was designed. But I understand with modern media that's what happened. But it does give them enhanced power, but there's also enhanced risk with it. And the risk is, if you don't take your party with you, they cut your head off.
They were both early adopters of social media, both loved a selfie. Why?
It suited their personalities. The selfie suited their personalities.
In 2007, when there was the Kevin 07 election, was the year the iPhone came out.
The selfie kings were cartoon gold for political satirist Warren Brown, who captured the pair capturing themselves.
And so everybody was fascinated with this iPhone, and you could do something, take a selfie. And I remember that expression, no one had ever heard that before, but Kevin Rudd was savvy enough to latch onto these sort of buzzwords and things of the time and appeal to young people. So I think, you know, the following year the word selfie popped up in the dictionary because Kevin Rudd made it popular.
Everyone's in there.
Well, I think they're both very adept at using social media, but it can also go against them too because, you know, Malcolm had this shtick that he was always on public transport, that he was a man of the people. He would do the selfie that he was on the public transport and he'd put it out there. But then all the other users of the train or the tram or whatever it might be would often take images of him standing there on his phone, Chris, not talking to anyone. And I don't know whether this was a dislike of people or actually an innate shyness, but I think Malcolm Turnbull found it very difficult to engage with strangers.
They both saw that the means by which they could achieve the leadership was to be well publicised, very visible, popular figures in the media. So they both courted the media relentlessly, and social media in particular, to sort of, in a sense, bully their own parties into electing them on the basis of widespread public awareness and public opinion polls.
Election fever rises as a Reachtel poll last night shows Labor climbing to just 51-49 behind and Kevin Rudd ahead as better Prime Minister. But the poll shows if Malcolm Turnbull replaced Tony Abbott as opposition leader, the coalition would regain the landslide 16-point lead it held over Julia Gillard.
I do not care what is in opinion polls because my job is to act in the national interest.
Unfortunately for both men, when their public opinion polls started to turn against them, because they hadn't built up that party faithful, their own senators and members strongly behind them, seeing a vision for the future with them, saying, here's a rocky road, we're in a rough patch, but don't worry. Your polls are bad, but we will press on through with you because we all together are on the same page. Because neither of them had built that strong party room allegiance, then their polls diminished and they became vulnerable.
You just never know, do you? You think something is going to be great and you just can't wait to get it. But don't you hate it when you start to realise it's not what you thought it was?
One little sidebar that most people forget is the Kevin O'Lemon ad that was running in Canberra the night before Kevin Rudd was brought down. I thought that ad was so effective and probably swung some votes in the Labor Party caucus.
We found a vulnerability with Rudd. It didn't take long for the Australian public to sort of see through him. Now, you could see that he was, you know, a mile wide and sort of an inch deep in terms of conviction and really lacked authenticity. But that stuff takes a while to sort of seep through to the consciousness of the voter. And I think when that started to come off, when Rudd's gloss started to come off, we felt it would come off fast. And I think that's where the Kevin O'Lemon ad was so effective.
It looked good, it sounded good, but it's all gone sour. It's a lemon. Kevin O'Lemon.
Good. Kids on the side. Over there. Good. Hi, folks. How are you? I haven't had quite as large a gathering of this in quite some time. I was elected by the Australian people as Prime Minister of this country to bring back a fair go for all Australians. And I have given my absolute best to do that. I'm proud of the fact that the first thing we did in government was ratify the Kyoto Protocol. What I'm less proud of is the fact that I have now blubbered.
Not to worry.
When I saw Kevin on TV with Therese and the kids, yeah, it was very sad because when the wheels come off, and he's usually always exhausted anyway because his work ethic's huge, he's not prepared for the bad news. I mean, you know, the really bad personal use. So, the lips quivering and, the moist eyes, all that kind of thing, very understandable. But it didn't have to go that way. There were opportunities before to fix that up that weren't taken. Do I think the people who voted against him are evil and nasty? No, I don't.
As the Gillard numbers climbed, the Rudd camp couldn't hold back the tide. By 9 this morning, Labor had pulled off a bloodless coup. Julia Gillard says she had to take control.
Because I believed that a good government was losing its way.
Removing Kevin was an act of political bastardry, for sure. But this act of political bastardry was made possible only because Kevin had been such a bastard himself to so many people already.
Kevin Rudd had contempt for the Cabinet, contempt for the Cabinet members, contempt for the caucus, contempt for the Parliament. And ultimately what brought him down was the Australian public worked out that he had contempt for them as well.
He only had to know Kevin Rudd for 5 minutes. That boy who took the prime ministership of him, he'll be vengeful, he'll be leaking in overdrive. He couldn't get the stuff out quickly enough to Laurie Oakes and Peter Hartcher to destroy Gillard's early prime ministership and sabotage the 2010 election campaign completely. An amazing act. The outgoing leader sabotaged day by day Gillard's campaign and produced a hung parliament, which was agony for the Federal Labor Party.
I know that Julie Bishop and Kevin Rudd were very close. I mean, Kevin Rudd, after he lost the Prime Ministership, would almost on a weekly basis catch up with Julie Bishop. She would often come to leadership meetings in the morning when we were in opposition and retail X or Y from Kevin Rudd, and staff like me would be charged to sort of go and look at the document or look at the speech or look at a travel record, etc., and sort of join the dots. And 9 times out of 10, it was ammunition for the opposition to the detriment of the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Gillard.
It's also very clear that there was leaking from Tony Abbott's cabinet. Was that Malcolm Turnbull? Do you have any knowledge of him leaking out of that cabinet?
No, I don't have. But I was shocked. That was the first time in my 20 years I'd ever heard of cabinet leaking, any cabinet leaking. And of course, it used to be like a joke. We'd go into the party room meetings every Tuesday morning and knowing that there were certain people in that party room who'd have their phones turned on, recording every word spoken with direct messaging to their favourite journo in the gallery. Now, that is another form of gross disloyalty.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. A little while ago, I met with the Prime Minister and advised him that I would be challenging him for the leadership of the Liberal Party.
The Prime Ministership of this country is not a prize or a plaything to be demanded. There will be a party room ballot. I will be a candidate and I expect to win.
Malcolm Turnbull was successful on 54, Tony Abbott 44.
Malcolm Turnbull will become the new Prime Minister of Australia.
There's a book to be written on the history of great political comebacks. You think of Menzies, Howard, de Gaulle, Churchill, Nixon, Bill Clinton, Netanyahu, Mahathir. I'd put Rudd and Turnbull in their camp in the sense that they were both widely written off when they lost the leaderships of their party. I mean, if you go back to late 2009, when Turnbull was dumped by the Liberal Party over climate change, he resigned from Parliament, or he announced his resignation. But he bounced back and eventually became the leader of his party and the Prime Minister within 6 years. Kevin Rudd, when he was unceremoniously dumped by his colleagues in the winter of 2010, widely written off. No one gave him a chance of bouncing back from adversity. And yet within 3 years, he became Prime Minister again. It's an extraordinary achievement on both their parts. And I say that as a sceptic of both of them. I don't like either Rudd or Turnbull, but you've got to admire their ability to bounce back from adversity.
I was stunned because his reaction was all about him.
It was described as madness by many.
When they were Prime Ministers, they copped it from all ends.
Have you ever leaked information
You got two big brains and they can't understand why people don't follow them.
I've spoken with Malcolm Turnbull about this a lot in recent times.
It's all about power, money and ideology. Screw anybody and anything that gets in the road.
It's easy just to think those in Canberra run the country, but it's so much more than that.
Why is this minister defending a chair that they know has lied? Why are they doing it?
That's a pretty serious allegation. Our country's at a crossroads. Are we making the most of our opportunities or just managing our decline? Is that a yes or no? Does the consumer of the vaccine have any say in the type they have? All the big issues that matter to you and those you love.
Looking for a hotel? Nobody beats Mr. Convincing on price.
Really? Their price? Hotels Combined Price. Their price? Hotels Combined Price. Don't be fooled. Before you book, check Hotels Combined.
Hotels Combined.
Think about it. The only person that can beat your personal best is you. So climb a bigger mountain. Go further. Go faster. Go to the edge of your comfort zone. And keep on going. The Iconic. Live your way.
I'm Paul Murray, and if you want to grow your business and market your brand with affordable and effective advertising solutions, then News Re-Engage is a must-attend event for you. At News Re-Engage, our marketing specialists will work with you to build a tailor-made marketing campaign with a huge portfolio of trusted media environments to engage your audience. The end result? Not just solid growth, but most importantly, a strong return on your investment. So register now. newsrsvp.com.au/TV.
It takes two hands to handle a walk across the burgers are bigger than Hungry Jack's.
Hungry Jack's is celebrating 50 years in Australia, and the burgers are still better at Hungry Jack's.
Bigger than Hungry Jack's.
You've drawn them sometimes looking into the mirror. What do you think
have.
they see when they look into the mirror?
I love that idea that they are so alike. Like it's disarming that they're so alike. And I love the idea that one day they would look in the mirror and see the other person looking back, because that's how we see them.
One issue always put wind in the political sails of Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd: climate change. For Rudd, it was the greatest challenge of our time, but he squibbed it. As for Turnbull, he said he wouldn't lead a party less committed to climate action than him, but he did.
He is going to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, and I don't think anybody can reasonably oppose that.
But there was a tantalising crossroads, a sliding doors moment in 2009 that eventually would cost both men their leadership. Rudd wanted to pass his emissions trading scheme. Malcolm Turnbull wanted to amend it, satisfy his sceptical party room, pass it and move on.
Mr Turnbull wants it passed, but a third of his party room doesn't, including his Senate leader, Nick Minchin.
The Senate overwhelmingly rejected this abomination in August. It should do so again.
At the time, I was Malcolm Turnbull's Chief of Staff, and at his behest, I rang Rudd's office. Would the PM meet the opposition leader, try to thrash out a deal, get it done before an internal climate revolt claimed Turnbull? Rudd refused.
Big mistake, because if Malcolm Turnbull, if his offerings were accepted and Kevin Rudd did a deal with Turnbull on an emissions trading scheme, Turnbull would have been the leader, and I suspect that Kevin Rudd would never have been brought down in 2010 because he wouldn't have faced the pressure over the emissions trading scheme from one Tony Abbott.
Mr Abbott has said that he thinks climate change is crap.
Another Kevin con job. You will still pay and it will still hurt.
I think Kevin thought he could both bully Malcolm into supporting the CPRS and at the same time attack him relentlessly as being potentially a victim of the crazy sceptics in his own party. So it was a case of have your cake and eat it too, you know, and Kevin suffering, you know, from enormous overconfidence, just like Malcolm, thought he could get away with this contradictory strategy.
They had the potential to be two of the greatest prime ministers this country's ever had. Intellectually, really clever. Sadly, sometimes Kevin wanted to make sure he was the smartest person in the room. But when it came to policy, right back in the Goss days, all the way through, he was a policy genius. But sometimes there's not a big gap between genius and narcissism.
While Tony Abbott's publicly supporting Mr Turnbull, privately he's joined the dissenters, possibly as an alternative leader.
Tony's expressed a number of views, each of which is at odds with the view he expressed before.
I recall from that fateful day at which you were present when Tony and I went to see Malcolm to say that we couldn't stay in the shadow cabinet if he was determined to have the coalition support this legislation. And he said, how can I pull out of this? What damage will that do to my credibility? I was stunned because his reaction was all about him and what this would do to him.
A decade later, Malcolm Turnbull reclaimed the leadership, ousting Tony Abbott to become Prime Minister.
We have lost 30 news polls in a row. It is clear that the people have made up their mind.
He's criticised what he calls a blokey political culture, but the same accusation has come his way. Why didn't Malcolm Turnbull put you in his ministry?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Malcolm.
Sharman Stone spent 20 years in Parliament. She was a minister in the Howard government and shadow minister under Nelson, Turnbull and Abbott.
Morning. How are you?
But when Malcolm became PM, she didn't make the cut.
Perhaps he didn't have enough spaces by the time he allocated the spots to the team of boys who orchestrated the return.
The team of boys? You think it was a boys' club that brought Malcolm Turnbull back?
I do. There was a meeting held in a nearby electoral office just on the eve of the spill being called, which was all men.
What does that say to you?
It said to me that it was a boys' club.
And that's why you missed out?
I can't draw a direct line there, but as you'd be aware in this game, those who prepare the way for you in a spill are acknowledged and rewarded when you then allocate the portfolios.
So these factional machinations, even in the Liberal Party and even under Malcolm Turnbull, are very much a blokey affair?
Pretty much.
I remember a journo asked Malcolm and Kevin, you two guys should form a party and you would get a lot of support from Australia. And they looked at each other and smiled, and one of them simply said, yeah, we could do that, and it would probably basically implied it would be very successful, but we could never agree on who'd be the leader. So it's the old story. You got two big brains, and they can't understand why people don't follow them, and they are just self-assured.
So there's a story of leaving the 2015 Midwinter Ball, and Malcolm's, very depressed and very upset, and he's been caned by Alan Jones on 2GB and caned by Andrew Bolt in the papers, and he comes up to me, puts his head on my shoulders, almost in tears, actually quite depressed, and said, "What is your company doing to me?" And trying to change the subject, I remarked at what a beautiful jacket he was wearing, and it was clearly a handmade jacket. It's beautiful. And he sort of instantly sparked up and preened about the jacket and said, "Kevin gave me this. It's a present from Kevin," which sort of struck me as a very interesting position for him. You know, so this is before he gets the leadership. He's lost the opposition leader's job, and he and Kevin are now on a unity ticket, which said a bit to me.
So at the moment, are they mates, partners in crime, or frenemies?
I think perhaps frenemies is the best way to describe it.
It is remarkable that they both now seem to be pursuing vendettas of a similar kind against those that they believe have been very damaging to them. They are both, in a sense, defeated leaders, both brought down, in my view, by their own character flaws, but seeking to place the blame for their downfalls on others.
There's some very bruised egos with these two men, and it's about finding in their post-political life some sort of platform where they are engaged in the national conversation, where they can be as effective, as influential, and possibly, for both of them, as popular again from the outside in a way that they never fulfilled on the inside.
People have written me off before.
Once vicious enemies, the former Prime Ministers have now come together on climate change and energy and their call for a royal commission into the Australian media.
I think together with Malcolm, we'd both agree.
Broadly, I agree with what Kevin said.
Years ago, I would have doubted there'd be so much agreement between the two of you.
Once both men courted Rupert Murdoch.
Would Mr Rudd make a good Prime Minister, do you think?
Oh, I'm sure.
But that's all changed.
And as for Murdoch, well, it's all about power, money and ideology. And screw anybody and anything that gets in the road.
Every politician, I don't care what country, where they are, who they are, they're all paranoid about the press.
Both men benefited from the support of News Corp at various times in their careers. Both sought to ingratiate themselves with Rupert and many others at News Corp, sought to use News Corp to achieve their objectives. So to now turn around and blame it all on News Corp seems to me the height of hypocrisy.
The most powerful political actor in Australia is not the Liberal Party or the National Party or the Labor Party. It is News Corporation.
I've spoken with Malcolm Turnbull about this a lot in recent times. Malcolm, in his period as Prime Minister, was fearful of the Murdoch media beast in terms of what it could do to us.
So it's a bit rich to blame News Corp for their own failings. When they were Prime Ministers, they copped it from all ends. The ABC, the Herald, the Age and News Corp. It's a very simplistic way of explaining their failures.
Not only does Malcolm Turnbull have News Corp in his sights, he's also taken aim at his own party.
Malcolm Turnbull just emerging from the room with Julie Bishop by his side, the outgoing Prime Minister and Deputy Liberal Leader.
2.5 years after leaving politics, Turnbull fanned the controversy over Christian Porter's alleged historical rape case, raising questions about the alleged victim's death.
We don't know for sure that she took her own life. We know for sure that she's dead, and there needs to be an inquest. And it certainly has been reported in the media as a suicide. I have a question mark in my own mind about the timing of it, because the timing seems counterintuitive.
Have you ever leaked information while you were a politician about a colleague or an opinion to a News Corp journalist?
Well, Senator, if we're going to enter into the debate about all of our individual relationships with journalists over the last 10 or 20 years, it would make for a good session which would probably take us a few hours.
What I'd say is 24 years as a newspaper editor, the most active texter in senior political life I've ever come across is Kevin.
Was he more active when he was Prime Minister or after he'd been tossed?
I think he was more active as Foreign Minister.
After he'd been brought down as Prime Minister, he was a very busy texting Foreign Minister.
That's it.
I just see two really bright, intelligent men who are running around still consumed by the fact that they lost the job. They're blaming everyone else but themselves, whereas they've got a contribution to make to this country. They're smart enough to do it. I'd urge them to do it. I'd say to Scott Morrison, Scott, for God's sake, find them something constructive to do. Do what the Americans do. Use our prime ministers, use Abbott, whoever else for the country. And if they don't want to do that, then both of them are wealthy enough to make a contribution in their own way, and they should do that. Be positive.
What really should Australia get from them that could be useful?
I think it's a big question in our country, isn't it? And it's been asked for many years. You know, how do we use our former prime ministers, and are they properly harnessed? You know, I became quite good friends with Paul Keating after he lost the job, and occasionally visited him in his office, and was always struck what a large intellectual horsepower sat across me on the desk, and how underutilised it was. Now, it seems to me that as a country we could get a lot more from Kevin and Malcolm, and they might feel a lot less resentful about their own demise if the country did find a way to get the best out of them. I'm amazed that John Howard continues to be so positive, and I note that Bob Hawke was never someone to throw rocks at the government of the day in his time after the Prime Ministership. But they'd probably actually satisfied their ambitions. And I think these two men, they left politics with their ambition unsatisfied.